Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast.
Roland Allen's The Spontaneous Expansion of the Church, Chapter 7, Missionary Organization. This chapter and the following are really one chapter. In this chapter, I argue that our missionary society organization is full of dangers and that it produces serious difficulties at home and abroad. It makes all progress depend upon money and has created a form of mission by proxy, which it is reproducing everywhere. It represents the antithesis of spontaneous expansion. For missionary work, we have two organizations, one which is ancient and one which is modern, one simple, the other very cumbrous. The simple, necessary organization is the organization of the church. The cumbrous modern organization is the organization of missionary societies. The church was first established and organized with a worldwide mission for a worldwide work. It was a living organism composed of living souls deriving their life from Christ, who was its head. It was an organism which grew by its own spontaneous activity, the expression of that life which it had in union with Christ, the Savior. Its organization was the organization fitted for such an organism. It was the organization of a missionary body. Consequently, there was no special organization for missions in the early church. The church organization sufficed. It was simple and complete. There was abundant room in it for the expression of the spontaneous individual activity of its members, for every member was potentially a missionary, and the church, as an organized body, expected that activity and knew how to act when its members did their duty. With the activity of its members, it grew simply by multiplying its bishops. The new modern missionary organization is an addition. With us, the church had largely ceased to be self-expanding. Its members had, for the most part, forgotten its missionary character. Its organization had degenerated and become stiff and rigid. But the missionary spirit was not dead, and it demanded expression. Naturally, it expressed itself in the form characteristic of a Western people in this age. It took the form of elaborate organization. It created a new organization within the church. If we compare our modern missionary work with the missionary work of the early church, this is what differentiates them. With us, missions are the special work of a special organization. In the early church, missions were not a special work, and there was no special organization. We can, then, distinguish between the organization of the church as a missionary body and our modern missionary organization. It is into the nature of this latter organization and its relation to spontaneous expansion that we must now inquire. The work accomplished by Christian men working in and through this special organization is, without question, the most important that has been done in the world in modern times. No man who believes that ideals are more vital to human progress than material arts, and that spiritual reformation is more necessary for human progress than material improvement, can look out into the world and consider what has been done and the forces which have been set in motion without realizing this. But when we ascribe these results to our modern organization and say, as we often do say, that we have attained these results by our organization, we forget that results as great were attained in the past without our modern organization. The results are due not to our organization, but to that undying spirit of love for the souls of men which Christ inspires. The modern organization is only the form in which we have expressed that spirit, and a time may come when organization, which seems to be absolutely necessary, may cease to be necessary, or may take such different shape as to be hardly recognizable, for it has within it elements of weakness which betray its temporary character. Missionary work is presented to us not as the work of the church, but as the work of private societies within the church. Our ears have deafened and our hearts hardened by the clamor of competing appeals. Every parish and nearly every individual is bewildered and demoralized by it, as organization strives with organization to gain the ear and touch a pocket of as large a number of people as possible. It is true that a claim is sometimes made on behalf of some society that it represents the church for missionary work. But if the use of that ambiguous term is meant to suggest that the society which makes the claim has any exclusive or prerogative right to attention, very few people believe it. The mere existence of other societies in the church for doing similar work disproves it. No society within the church can have any exclusive right to represent the church. The church is, as I have said, in her nature, a missionary society, and no group of her members can represent in that sense what she alone is. No society within the church can be more than an association of individuals for the furtherance of a work in which they are interested. Instinctively, men look upon mission work, when presented to them as a special work of societies, as a special interest group, of a group of churchmen, a work in which they may or may not take any interest, and may or may not support. No argument shakes that conviction. Missionary work must either be the relation of the church to the world, or a fad of a few. Missionary organization in these societies is necessarily elaborate. It involves the creation of offices and departments with directors, clerks, accountants, divided and subdivided. Now, elaborate organization exercises a strange fascination over the minds of men, and this is as true of our missionary organization as of any other organization. It tends to become an end in itself. Men incline more and more to rely upon it. They learn to ascribe it to virtues which do not belong to it. There is a horrible tendency for an organization to grow in importance till it overshadows the end of its existence and begins to exist for itself. Many men have established organizations in order to achieve by them a definite object, and have been caught in the toils of the organizations which they have created. Businessmen, for instance, have created organizations that by them they might become rich, and then, having grown rich even in their own estimation, have gone on laboring simply to keep the organization in existence. The maintenance of the organization has become a greater incentive to work than the purpose for which it was first created. This is the truth that Samuel Butler set forth in Erewhon when he depicted men destroying their machines because they were afraid that they might become their slaves, tending and feeding them for their lives. May not man himself become a sort of parasite upon the machines, an affectionate, machine-tickling aphid? The servant glides by imperceptible approaches into the master, and we have come to such pass as that, even now, man must suffer terribly on ceasing to benefit the machines. The danger is a real one. I heard the other day of an organization started to relieve a certain special evil. It was reported that means might be found to wipe out this evil. The first expression of the directors was not one of joy at such glorious prospect, but of anxiety for their organization. If this happens, they said, what will become of our organization? And they were quite relieved when they were assured that there would be plenty of work for them to do for many years to come. Suppose that it were indubitably clear that the end for which all these organizations exist would be best served by the elimination of some of them, or by their fusion. Would their directors be ready to serve the cause for which the organizations were founded by destroying them? If not, could it be for any other reason than that the organization had become an end in itself apart from the end for which it was created? The directors of each organization would have innumerable arguments to prove that their own organization must be maintained at all costs. And one of the most powerful would be the argument from their subscribers that they would not support the work except through that particular organization. But is not that to argue that directors and contributors alike put the organization before the work which the organization exists to do? Imagine one of our great missionary organizations losing itself to further the cause for which it exists. Is it credible? But if it is not, it can only be incredible, because we know that the organizations have become, to no small extent, ends in themselves. Our love of organization leads us to rely upon it. This is not infrequently the cause of failure in the business world. When once an organization has been built up men think that all that is needed is to keep it going and to enlarge it. The direction becomes mechanical, and as the direction becomes mechanical, the organization ceases to produce the results expected. This is the cause of much failure in the educational world. Men evolve a method of teaching, and they begin to think that the method can be worked mechanically, and instantly it loses its power. This is still more the case in spiritual work. Yet we hear men talk as if the enlargement of the organization would by itself produce the spiritual results. Give us, they say, so much more money and so many more men, and the propagation of the gospel will advance in proportion. The conclusion is far from certain. That men speak as if it were certain only shows that they are beginning to rely upon the organization to do the work. Not only does our love of organization lead us to expect from it spiritual results, it also leads us to ascribe to it results which do not belong to it. I have already pointed out a tendency to believe that the great success of our modern missionary work is due to our splendid organization, while all history shows that success as great, and perhaps of a deeper character, has been attained without any such organization as ours. But there is one virtue which we ascribe to our organization, which we ought carefully to consider. Men often say that continuity in our mission work depends upon our mission organization, and they point to the fact that work supported by an organization like ours does not stop with the death of the man who started it. They point to the fact that some work begun by an individual unsupported by an organization often, apparently, does end with his death. When we speak of organization securing continuity, we mean that the continuity of the work depends upon the continuity of the organization which supports it. The continuity is really in the organization. If the organization ceases, the work ceases. Some men would perhaps go so far to say that this is precisely what they do mean, as it's certainly what they ought to mean, when they ascribe the continuity of missionary work to our missionary organization. Stop the organization, they would say, and the work will cease. There is a kind of work which depends for continuity upon the continuity of an organization which supports it. There is also a kind of work which does not. The man who first imported Australian rabbits in tins into England established an organization, and if the organizations which now carry on that work ceased, the continuity of the supply of Australian rabbits to England would cease also. The man who first imported rabbits into Australia was not supported by any organization established to carry on the importation of rabbits. Yet there was no lack of continuity. Muslim expansion in the present day is, as we should say, quite unorganized. Yet there is continuity. In these and similar cases, continuity depends upon the interior life of that which is propagated. It grows spontaneously by its own inward force, and the continuity consists in the unity of life. To insist, then, that our missionary organization is essential for the continuity of that work which we do in foreign lands, and to ascribe the continuity of that work to the organization, is to ascribe to our work a particular character as being, in itself, lifeless. If the continuity of that work which we do depends upon the organization, it is manifest that the work which we do must be something other than the propagation of life. A human organization is necessary to secure the continuity of a human creation. It is not necessary to secure the continuity of that which has life. But if our work is the propagation of life, if it is to bring men the knowledge of Christ who is life, and who gives men life, then the continuity of the work cannot depend upon a source which cannot give the life, but can only minister it, and it cannot be thought to depend upon it, unless those who so think they are consciously or unconsciously allowing the organization to usurp Christ's place. This may be the inward reason why organizations for spiritual work constantly break down. As the organizations grow, they assume an undue importance in the minds of their directors and supporters. More and more, men begin to rely upon them. More and more, they allow them to take the place which is Christ's alone. Then, in order that Christ may be revealed as the only source of life, it is necessary that the organization should manifestly fail, and a great disaster befalls it, which appears to those who are trusting the organization as a disaster to the cause for which the organization was designed. There's a great falling away, a great destruction, a great tribulation, and then, out of the disaster, the tribulation, Christ is revealed once more as the only source of strength, the only Savior. It may be that the threatening revolt against our missions, to which I have already referred, may usher in such a period of tribulation. The weakness of our organization will be revealed. There will be a great falling away. There will be great destruction and loss. And then Christ will appear once again, and all that is true, all that is rooted in him, will be made manifest, and will break forth into new life inspired by his undying power. We of today are enamored of organization. We pride ourselves on our skill in designing and directing it. But when we are dealing with the propagation of the gospel, our love for it leads us into serious dangers. It leads us to give to material an undue importance. It leads us to attempt to organize spiritual forces. It leads us to give to material an undue importance. That our missionary organization is largely concerned with the collection and administration of material requires little argument. Every report, every magazine issued by any of the societies reveals it. How anxious this makes our greatest and most spiritual leaders is shown by their constantly repeated warnings. Such men would not say again and again, "We must not allow the material to take the first place in our thoughts. We must not permit the collection of money to distract our attention from the spiritual," unless they knew and felt how real the danger is. The demand for the material is constant, pressing, immediate. It is impossible that men who rely upon voluntary contributions for the support of large and expensive undertakings should not feel the burden. It is almost impossible that this burden should not be often in their thoughts, and often first in their thoughts. It is impossible that their appeals should not emphasize this need and present it to supporters, as it presents itself to them, as the real pressing need of the moment. Say what they will, strive as they will, the need for material exercise is a strong constraint and thrusts itself continually into the foreground. All our missions have been bound up with the administration of property, the building and equipment of large stations, schools, hospitals, industrial institutions, and the like, all financed largely from home. As years passed, the burden grew, and irresistibly, the demand for material became more and more insistent, and the collection of funds occupied more and more of our thought and care. Miss Constance Padwick, speaking of the sudden outbreak of missionary literature for the young in the first half of the 19th century, says that examination of the story of the missionary societies during the 30s led to the conviction that missionary committees had discovered not children, but a copper mine. And a similar examination of the large output of leaflets for missionary intercession, with their persistent emphasis upon appeals for gifts during the last 20 years, might lead a critical mind to the conviction that their authors had discovered not the power of prayer, but a silver mine. The QIP boasts that it has raised £58,700 for the training of candidates. It is difficult to express the sense of overwhelming materialism which has prolonged and careful study of our missionary literature produces upon the mind of the reader. Careful examination reveals very few articles which do not contain directly or indirectly expressed an appeal for money. It is money, money everywhere, all the time. Everything depends upon money. Listen to the Bishop of Zanzibar confronted with a possible reduction of £4,500. Quote, "Of course no progress will be possible, no development, no preaching the gospel in new parts of the diocese." End quote. Or to the Bishop of Korea, quote, "If the missions of the good old Church of England lag behind those of the American Presbyterians and Wesleyans, it is because they, the latter, have been accorded wealthy support in men and money." End quote. Abroad we see the same cause, producing the same result. The collection of material is the pressing need. The collection of material is an art with which we are all familiar. Our methods of collecting funds and of administering them have been carried abroad. There, too, the collection of material is put into prominence and occupies a very large part, not only of our thoughts, but of the thoughts of our native agents and converts. And the claim of the native Christians, as they grow in knowledge and understanding of the sources of the money, which is now spent in their country to control its use, may lead to serious difficulties. About 19/20ths, we are told, on the authority of Dr. A.J. Brown, of the money now expended on the foreign field comes from Europe and America. And it is, he says, a sound principle that money should be administered by those who are selected by the representatives of the donors and who can be held to accountability for its use. Moreover, nearly all church property and buildings are held by the societies. One day, therefore, there may arise no small strife over the administration of this money and the ownership of this property. For as Dr. MacNichol says, the power of the purse is in the hands of the foreign missionary, and without that power, the Indian leaders feel themselves helpless. A Chinese writer put it in this form: evangelism in China costs 12 million American dollars annually. Towards this immense sum, Chinese Christians can contribute $1 million only. This shows that, if Chinese control of the church means financial independence also, the Chinese church faces an economic burden it cannot shoulder. The conclusion is clear. We have taught all our converts to feel helpless without money. I can imagine that if I were a Muslim, the reading of the reports of Christian missionary societies would afford me great satisfaction. I should compare the laborious efforts of the Christians to propagate their religion with the silent, spontaneous expansion of Islam. Let them pour out their money, I should say. Let them establish all this extravagant machinery. They may make a few converts, but they will do us more good than harm. They know not the power of a true religion. Whilst they labor at these material things, we advance by our own inherent spiritual power. They organize and build, they toil and sweat to convert men by their material methods. Islam grows whilst we sit still. With all their gifts, they purchase a few converts, and then they must begin all over again in the same costly way to make a few more. One convert to Islam is the sure first fruit of a great harvest. Islam advances automatically. God works without our material aid. These men know nothing of spiritual forces, the forces that work automatically, the power which is of God. I should be wrong, but I should not be wholly wrong. The Christian organization does emphasize the material. This also leads us to attempt to organize spiritual forces. Our love of organization leads us to attempt to fix the place where, and the time at which, and the men by whom a spiritual movement is to take place. We fix the place. We choose what we call a strategic center and plant there our buildings and our institutions. There the spiritual movements must take place if we are to be in any way the agents of it. The organization binds us to that place, and there we must stay as long as those buildings stand and the posts remain open. The society organization demands it. Here is a station. It must be occupied. Here is a post vacant. It must be filled. That is quite reasonable if we are dealing with organization for ends which we understand and the means to attain which are more or less in our power. But is a spiritual movement of that character? For spiritual work, spiritual organization is necessary. But can we create a spiritual organization of spiritual forces? Only a divine intelligence can do that. But we attempt to do the work of that divine intelligence by fixing our stations and immobilizing our men. Consequently, we see spiritual movements taking place not far from us, and we ourselves outside them, or, if not outside them altogether, utterly incapable of taking our proper part in them. What we can do is to organize our own powers, and that we do within the limits of our intelligence. We can organize the external arrangements of a church, the provision of its ministers and ornaments and buildings, and we can train men for that organization. But to be God's agents in spiritual movements, we must follow, not lead. We want to lead, and, trying to lead, we are simply left behind. We say, here we will have our buildings, but the spiritual movements may be growing unseen by us in another place and by other means. We fix the time. We say, now we will organize a spiritual advance. We tried to do that in the war by a national mission. Others all over the world have tried and are trying to do the like. But they do not know the time, and the time does not come at the bidding of the organization. While the organization is cumbrously laboring, the time is at hand and come and passing away, and the organization has nothing or little to do with it. The organization is always too late, for we can organize the external results of a spiritual movement, but we cannot organize a spiritual movement. We fix the persons. We can create posts and select men to fill them, but we cannot choose the persons through whom spiritual movements are to take place. We, in a dim way, recognize a spiritual person when we see him, but to fill our posts, we have to take the best men whom we can get. We have to fill the posts at all costs, somehow, if we possibly can. Therefore, the administrators of the organization choose as well as they can and hope for the best. But it is not possible in that way to choose men to be agents of a spiritual movement. The true agents may be other men in quite other positions than our posts. We know that well enough, but nevertheless, the organization of missions, being an organization for a spiritual work, only too often becomes in our eyes the organization of a spiritual work. It is only too easy to slip from that for to that of, and we do it constantly. In all our selection of strategic points, as we call them, in all our creation of institutions, in all our talk of forward movements, we are constantly on the verge of this offense, of speaking and thinking as if we could organize spiritual forces. Our organization immobilizes our missionaries. It creates and maintains large stations and great institutions, and these absorb a very great proportion of our energy. We cannot move freely. A mission station is indeed a contradiction in terms. Mission implies movement. Station implies stopping. The modern term has a strange significance. The maintenance and direction of great schools, hospitals, and churches with their innumerable guilds and societies confine our activity within narrow limits. When once these things have been established, the missionaries who establish them must stay and look after them, and any advance must be made by others. Nay, more, when for some cause the missionaries in charge of these institutions fail in numbers, men engaged in opening new work must be recalled to direct the institutions. The larger they are, the more expensive, the more elaborate, the more they demand the first care of the missionaries. Any other work must be laid aside that these may be maintained. Great opportunities, widespread movements towards Christ must be neglected rather than that these institutions should lack workers. The immobilized force must be maintained at all costs. The mobile must wait for recruits. How many missions have any mobile force at all? Similarly, we immobilized native evangelists. We found a man who showed some evangelistic zeal. We brought him into our system. We trained him and paid him, and then fixed him in a definite spot as a teacher or catechist. He could no longer move freely from village to village, appealing to those whose hearts God had touched. He was compelled to stay, year after year, in a place where often his message was becoming, year after year, less effective, holding, in our phraseology, a lonely and difficult outpost. And then, when he broke down, we were grieved and disappointed, or even angry with him. In our organization, missionaries are a professional class. Christians leave our shores in great numbers. Few are, or think themselves to be, or think that they ought to be, missionaries of the gospel. We do not expect that where they go, the heathen will be converted and churches established spontaneously. It is almost universally taken for granted that missionary work is the work of a paid professional class, and that the utmost that can be expected of those who do not belong to this class is to support those who do. And even that is not expected of the majority. Missionary societies began their crusade, not by striving to call out the spirit of Christian men whose occupation carried them abroad, not by trying to impress upon the church at home that Christ calls all his people to witness for him wherever they may be, wherever they may go, but by creating an army of professional missionaries. The whole system of societies, boards, offices, accounts, contracts with missionaries, statistical returns, reports, reeks of it. From every missionary society, there goes out every day and all day into every part of the world with one insistent, unceasing voice the proclamation, the gospel must be preached in all the world, and the gospel must be preached by special agents maintained by a society for this particular work. No verbal denials can shake it. We created this paid professional missionary class not to support spontaneous missionary zeal on the part of our fellow countrymen, but to take the place of it. In the same way, we created a paid professional class of mission agents among our converts, not to support spontaneous expression of missionary zeal, for we did not dream of it, but to take the place of it. We were persuaded that to carry on the work in the country, we must have paid professional native agents. It is one of the most wonderful and amazing things in our modern religious thought that we have carried everywhere all over the world our stipendary system as if it were an essential part of the gospel which we preach. We were convinced that we must see to it that every little group of converts was in the care of some catechist or teacher, and that we must find evangelists to preach in the country, and that they must all be paid agents. The need for workers was pressing. Naturally, we seized upon every man who showed any zeal or ability, and we encouraged boys in mission schools who showed any promise to seek employment in the mission. Mr. Hilbert Ware, writing of the boarding schools connected with the Teluga mission in 1915, says, "All these were brought into existence solely for this purpose, and although other boys, by paying their own fees, may receive their education in them, yet they are still kept up entirely with the view of supplying the mission's annual demand for agents. At a certain stage of their course, not very advanced, everyone has to face the question whether he is prepared to pledge himself to serve the mission, when his time is completed, for a definite period of about 7 years. If he is not, he must resign his scholarship, which is intended solely to train a student for mission work. Practically all the boys look forward from the time they first enter the boarding school to mission service. There grew up a regularly ordered system. Mission workers were classed and paid according to their class, just like government clerks. The basis of classification was pay, and zealous work was rewarded with an advance in position and a corresponding increase in salary. Mission agents, brought up under such a system as this, are liable to 4 very serious temptations. Number 1, they are tempted to think an increase of pay the one test of progress. If at the end of a reasonable time, a man does not obtain the status and pay of a higher class, it argues that his conduct has been not quite what it ought to have been. I once came across a striking illustration of this in India. A poor destitute cripple educated at the expense of a missionary made remarkable progress and developed great spiritual powers, and exercised a wonderful influence over those with whom he came in contact. Seeing this, the missionary made him a reader in a leper asylum, where he could drag himself about from house to house and teach the inmates. All went well for a year or 2. Then he sent in an application for the pay of a higher class. This greatly disturbed his benefactors. "Here," they said, "is a man who has received everything from us, and we thought he was working from pure love of Christ. Yet the first use that he makes of his new powers is to demand a salary." It is not necessary to conclude that he was not really working for love of Christ. Salary was a part of the system in which he lived. The only symbol of progress was an increase of pay. In his own eyes, and in the eyes of his fellows, to fail to receive the higher position and the higher pay would have been proof that in some way he had not done his duty. Number 2, they are tempted to a low conception of their work. They are paid by the mission. They are tempted to work for the mission. It is almost universally confessed that our converts look upon the work of the mission as our work. Mission agents are men paid to take part in our work. So long as they look upon it as our work, only men of exceptional spiritual character will be able to look upon it as divine work. So long as they are servants of the mission, only men of rare spiritual character will be able to rise above the idea of their service, which that title suggests. And the heathen round them, and it is very important what the heathen think, will be quite unable to see anything more. Number 3, there is great temptation to servility of mind and practice. It is curious how often our missionaries find dependence and timidity characteristic of their mission workers, but the system tends to exaggerate any such weakness. It is always safe for the mission agent to wait for instructions. He is separated from his own people by religion, from his congregation by education, from his superior officer by race. He stands in a peculiarly isolated position. If he appeals for a command, there will be no hesitation in giving it on the part of the foreigner, and, right or wrong, no risk in obeying it on his part. Independent action, on the other hand, is always risky. To practice independence under such circumstances demands almost superhuman strength of character. Number 4. Not unnaturally, there is among mission agents much discontent. In the early days of a mission in country districts, the position of the native agent is not unenviable. He is better educated than his fellows, and he is guarded against the terrors of absolute destitution. But the moment that other Christians attain to the same position of security by secular occupations, they tend to despise mission agents as men who earn small salaries by serving the mission. The more the congregation advances in secular education and wealth, the stronger this tendency becomes, with the result that the better and more capable of the younger generation refuse to accept this service. Such a service must breed discontent among those who accept it. They blame their own people. They blame the missionaries. They constantly complain that the missionaries do not associate with them on equal terms, that they treat them as servants, that young men from England are set over experienced natives, and for the sake of their own self-respect they naturally covet the status and salaries of European missionaries. There is a divine discontent, and there is a discontent which is far from divine. The temptation which besets the mission agent is a temptation to a discontent which drags down the soul, not to the discontent which spurs it on. To what a height this professional view of missionary work has grown may be seen from a sentence written by the editor of the East and West in January 1921. If we remove a pecuniary grievance, he says, it would go far toward securing for the service of the Christian Church many of the best educated Indians who are at present to be found in government employ. This is no exceptional statement. Something of the kind occurs frequently in missionary reports and speeches. It expresses only a common thought, but it contains the pure doctrine of professionalism. The service of the church is set over against government employment. Christian men do not serve the church except in the service of the church, that is, as paid professionals. The inducement to enter the service of the church is the same as the inducement to serve the government, that is, pecuniary profit. This system, thus rooted in the material and professional, is something essentially of us. It springs from us. It expresses our spirit. Everybody knows that we established it because it was suited to us and our work. Here in the West, it is at home. Anywhere else, it is foreign in the innermost sense of that word. How foreign it is becomes at once apparent if we consider the difficulties which arise when we try to find terms on which men of another race can be admitted to those higher offices which we have hitherto held ourselves. We are constantly being told that the organization can only be efficiently worked by foreign directors. Nearly all our missionaries seem to be agreed that very few natives can carry on our organization. Foreigner succeeds foreigner in the direction of nearly all our missionary work, and when any advance is to be made, the first cry is for an increase in the number of foreign directors. A century of teaching, a multitude of converts, make, comparatively speaking, little difference. The organization remains, what it always was, ours, something which we alone can direct and use. For the natives of the country, with a few rare exceptions, it remains an organization which can only admit them to subordinate positions, while the great mass of native Christians can find no proper place in it. If they can be said to be organized at all for missionary work, it is only in as far as they can assist the foreign missionary, follow his directions, or support the work by their contributions. So far from assisting them to propagate the gospel, the organization positively hinders them, because they cannot understand or use it for themselves. It is not surprising that the ablest native Christians decline to join such an organization. It is not really pecuniary loss which keeps them from mission work. Able young men in England join the ranks of the missionaries paid by a society because they understand the organization and can find in it full scope for their powers, but they would soon cease to offer themselves if they found that they must work all their lives under a foreigner directing a system foreign to them. It is really not true to say that the native Christians decline mission work because they want larger salaries than missionaries can afford to give. It is much more true that they decline because they cannot endure to spend all their lives in subordination to a foreigner directing a foreign system in which the power of the purse is the prevailing force, and money the thing of first importance. Thus, our materialism and professionalism has ended in driving many of the best men away from missionary work. Contrast with that the power of voluntary unpaid service. In an article on India's mass movements in the International Review of Missions for April 1917, Dr. Warna says, "In the Hindustani-speaking country, there is in each caste community, in each village, a headman who is called a Kahudri. The Kahudris have long been the representatives of their communities as non-Christians, and on becoming Christians, we take them over as leaders if they are suitable men. If not, the Christians elect other men. We could have had a Kahudri movement much sooner, but we made the mistake of thinking that such poor people should be paid for service, and we gave the Kahudris, who worked part of their time, a small salary. This did two things. It changed the work from the realm of voluntary to paid service, and it limited the number of workers to those who received part salary. Since Kahudri work has been made voluntary, voluntary workers are counted not by hundreds, but by thousands." A paid Indian preacher, be he ever so good, has little authority and power over the social life of a village Christian community as compared to the Kahudri. Our experience is that when the responsibility for the social and religious life and the instruction of his community has been taken over by the Kahudri, he works at the problem and from a new point of view welcomes the help of the preacher. If a missionary organization ought to assist the evangelization of the world, when it is apparent that the great majority of the Christians living in the midst of vast heathen populations cannot use the organization which we have set up without foreign assistance, and the few who think that they can are driven into opposition, the only conclusion is that the work cannot be done through the organization. Many years ago, an African educated in Western schools compared our attempts to propagate Christianity with the attempt of the Romans to introduce Roman civilization into Britain. The comparison is painfully apt. Roman civilization flourished for a time where Roman influence was strong, but the natives never really understood it, and when the Romans withdrew, it passed away with them. Canon Gardner of Cairo has warned us against missions by proxy and has suggested that there is a terrible danger that we shall beget native communities in our own likeness, who will also insist before long on doing their work by proxy. He might have gone further. We have created and are creating and must create such communities because we carry everywhere the stipendary system on which the work of our societies is based, and teach all our converts that it is the duty of Christians to evangelize by paying evangelists. Our missionary organization is essentially organization of missions by proxy. Within such a professional system as ours, there can be little room for spontaneous activity. All men naturally tend to leave direct missionary work to a professional class when there exists a professional class whose special duty is to do it. They inevitably tend to turn to that class and to the societies which support it, and to appeal to them rather than to begin themselves to do what they see needs to be done. The existence of the societies and the professional class seems to relieve all but a few of the most active and earnest of their responsibility. It affords all but the most zealous an excuse for inactivity. A professional class does not easily encourage the spontaneous zeal of men who are not members of their profession. Spontaneous activity is indeed rather alarming to those who direct an organization such as ours. When the propagation of the faith is spontaneous, and each expresses his own zeal in his own way, not the saint alone, but the charlatan may find an opportunity for acquiring an influence over others. Side by side with St. Peter is Simon Magus. Side by side with Demetrius is Diotrephes. In the working of an organization, the man who is welcome, the man who is at home, is the plain, mechanical, orderly man who will keep within the bounds. Not only the swindler, but the inspired saint is a difficulty. He appears self-willed, extravagant, eccentric. He is independent and is always on the verge of breaking the orderly methods of the organization. Our organization tends always to keep the mean. If it checks the exuberance of genius, if it checks the inspired saint, it checks also the charlatan. Consequently, it seems to many minds safe. In word, we often say that we wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, but we generally mean that we wish they would all work diligently in and for the organization, under the direction of those responsible for the organization. This form of organization is natural to men with our character and experience. It is not in any sense a universal mode of expression. The erection of buildings, the management of property, and the creation of an army of professional preachers is to us at this moment of the world's history the natural and obvious method of carrying on our work. This kind of organization suits our capacities, appeals to our sense of fitness, satisfies our eyes. But an elaborate material machinery for the propagation of ideas seems to most of those to whom we go almost absurd. You do not want buildings and machinery to propagate ideas or a faith. You want ideas and a faith. Organization and buildings ought to follow and spring out of the work of ideas and the faith. Our organization seems to them to put the wrong things first. We collect money and pay men to preach and teach. Outside our circle, nearly all men think that very strange. All knowledge, above all, religious knowledge, is a divine gift, and to connect it with money is a sort of simony. A paid preacher is suspected as a preacher paid to teach what he is told to teach by those who pay him, not the inspired possessor of a divine gift. An organization which collects money and pays salaries to missionaries of a divine faith seems to such men a monstrous thing, wholly unspiritual. If those who direct it expect to propagate a faith by building preaching rooms and schools and hospitals, they show that they have no idea what spiritual forces are, or how they work. It is true that a certain number of our converts, by long association with us, learn to shake off these ideas, and that some non-Christians imitate us in this as in our Western practices, but the vast majority never understand our organization. It is to them foreign in the innermost sense of that word. Nor are the religious ideas which render our organization obnoxious to others wholly unknown among ourselves. Even within our own circle, the same thought is at work. Many men at home admit it, and their attitude towards the preaching betrays their thought. They know that many preachers who receive salaries are the possessors of a divine gift, but for the preaching of paid preachers as a body, they have little respect. They give quite a different kind of attention to a man whom they know to be preaching simply because he cannot help saying what is in his heart. Even to some of us, an organization which exists to provide buildings and salaries for men who would never preach unless training and salaries had been provided for them, seems to be treading a dangerous path. A day may not be far off when, even at home, the organization which we now carry abroad will undergo radical change. For such a change, the missionary societies have themselves prepared the way. The preachers, they taught us from every pulpit that the church ought to be a missionary body. They have reiterated the command of Christ. They have almost exhausted argument to convince us that expansion is for the church the law of life. It is not then surprising that men, seeing the chaotic state of our missionary organization and groaning under its innumerable appeals, should begin to demand that the church be her own missionary society. That demand must issue in a reconsideration of the nature of the church and of her organization in relation to missions, and the discovery that her organization is, in its essential characteristics, the organization of a missionary body. Again, the societies have taught us from every pulpit that every Christian should be at heart a missionary, and the unshakable ground that the Spirit of Christ is given to all Christians, and that the Spirit given is the Spirit which longs for and strives after the salvation of all men in Christ. That teaching has not been without effect. Many are beginning to believe it. and one day, many will act on it. The preacher, no doubt, expected a reaction in the form of support for his society, and no doubt it generally took that form. But there is no reason why it should take that form. There is nothing in the teaching to convince anyone that to express his missionary zeal he needs support, or belong to any other society than the church to which he already belongs. It is not necessary, though it may be convenient, to support any special society in order to do missionary work. Not every man is able to express his missionary zeal best by joining any of these special organizations. He may not want to become the agent of any of these societies. If the church is a missionary society, and he a churchman, he may well feel that the society of which he is a member suffices. He may well prefer the larger society, unless he needs the support of a smaller society. If he wants that, he must of course conform to the orders and methods of the society of which he becomes an agent. But if he does not want that help, he is doing nothing disorderly in acting freely. He does not cease to be a Christian and a member of a missionary body because he does not add to the order of the church the more elaborate and precise order of some society organization. The only reason why men have not so acted more often is because they have been obsessed with the idea that a man, to express his missionary zeal properly, must be a member of some other body within the church, and that church membership is not sufficient. Many before now have thought that if they were to express their zeal freely outside the limits and restrictions of a special missionary society, they must go outside the church itself. But that is absurd. The multiplication of societies, which viewed as a missionary organization for the attainment of a common object, is wasteful, has at least kept before us the truth that men can work outside the societies without working outside the church. Men disliked the societies in existence, or they wanted some special work done which the societies were not doing, and they did not hesitate to act outside the then existing societies. It never occurred to them to think that in so doing they were violating any church order in founding a new association. But what a group of men can do without violating church order, any individual can do. Canon Gairdner, in the paper which I quoted above, points out the urgent need for their multiplication. He pleads for unofficial missionaries, above all, more unofficial missionaries. The organized societies would call such men freelances. But freelances from the point of view of the societies are not freelances from the point of view of the church. They're simply members of the church who are doing their duty to Christ and the church. They are noble examples to all indolent and slothful members. They are men who prefer the apostolic order and method to the modern elaboration. If they multiplied in number, it would speedily be found that the church organization was wide enough to embrace their work. It is commonly supposed that such action would lead to chaos. So far from leading to chaos, it would lead to order. The organization, which is really the source of all order in the church, would assume its proper and rightful place. Church organization would take the place now occupied in most men's minds by missionary organization. The societies would then appear to be what they really are, associations of Christian men designed to assist certain workers and certain kinds of work within the church. They would occupy, in relation to the church, a position somewhat like that which rich philanthropists occupy in relation to society, when they provide funds for the establishment of scholarships and fellowships, or of colleges or libraries, or other useful institutions. This argument applies not only to us, but to our converts abroad. They too have been restrained by the confusion of missionary organization with church organization. They too have been taught that if they work outside the missionary organization, they work outside the church. With them, this restraint has been far more severe than it has been with us, because the missionaries have represented to them both the society organization and church organization. But already in the mission field a distinction is being made, and churches are transformed from the missionary organization to the church organization. By degrees, the Christians will realize the importance of that distinction. And if we teach them what we teach at home, that every Christian, in virtue of his reception of Christ's Spirit, should be a missionary, we may expect them one day to arrive at the inevitable conclusion that there is no need for a man to add any other organization to the church organization in order to exercise his right to teach others, and they may arrive at this conclusion more easily than we ourselves, because they have not that innate delight in elaborate organization which is peculiarly our own. But that can only be if church organization becomes once more what it originally was, an organization in which the free, unfettered zeal of Christian men is recognized and consolidated. I was really surprised by this chapter because it seems like Alan at this point is getting more into like technical sorts of things and talking about like societies and structures and stuff. So I didn't think it was going to trigger as many thoughts and connections as it did, but there's actually quite a lot in here that just connected with so much of what we've done in this podcast. And there's no way I'm going to be able to touch on all of the things that came to mind. I tried to take notes as I was reading, but we'll try to touch on most of them and at least make references to them. And you can dig a little bit deeper or reach out to me. I would definitely love to talk about this. But the first connection that was made is this touches so much on what, now I can't think of his name, Bernard Eller. There we go. Bernard Eller, in his work, I think the one that I read right before this, actually, it wasn't Simplicity. It was on the like structure of the church, the Outward Bound, I think. And Eller's main premise is that, and he gives three analogies, but his premise is that the church has become something that it's not really supposed to be. And so institutionalized would be the overarching term that we would use for it today. Maybe in Alan's day, it would be industrialized, because there's a lot of what Alan's talking about. You can think like Henry Ford and all this industrialization that came within the 50 to 100 years right before Alan. That's kind of at its boom. All the assembly lines and all that stuff. Like Alan is facing, hey, the church is essentially making assembly lines here. We're making industrial factories for Christians, essentially. Or in our day, we don't use industrialization as much. We would use like institutionalized would be what we're using. But Eller is like, hey, look, the church is supposed to be outward bound, right? We're not supposed to be inward focused. And what happens with institutionalized or industrialized, these overly structured churches in the way that we're structuring them, is that people are focused inward on sustaining this thing. And that's most of what Alan here talks about, is like all the things that we do to try to sustain the organization, right? To sustain the means rather than to accomplish the end. And we think we're accomplishing the end, but really it's about the means. The organization becomes the thing that is attempted to be sustained. Whereas Eller argues that we should be more like an expeditionary force as opposed to a rear, I forget what he called, like the main core of troops. He says we should be the expeditionary force. Like the church is out there moving out, not trying to hold the line per se, which is reminiscent of, Jesus when he says, Peter, on this rock I build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You're like, gates are defensive structures, right? A lot of people take this as like, hey, the church is going to stand strong and hell will not conquer you. It's like, no, the gates of hell, right? At the castle of hell, at the structure, the institution of hell, those gates will not hold up against the assault of the church. Two totally different ways of looking at things, but in the institutionalized church, we think so much more about maintenance as opposed to the way that we move out. So Eller, his work, The Outward Bound, is going to be really valuable here. And if you want to get a deeper look into not missions specifically, but the church more broadly, then I definitely recommend checking out Eller's work. You can listen to me reading it, but it's always better to pick it up for yourself if you can. So that was definitely connection number one there. a big, strong connection. Another one of the concepts that kind of flows out from that is the idea of spontaneity here, which of course is Alan's main point or thesis throughout his whole book, right? It's titled The Spontaneous Expansion of the Church. But when you have institutionalization, as Eller identifies, you end up getting this professional class of people. And Alan here identifies the same thing. Well, what happens when you get a professional class? Well, you lose a whole lot. Well, not only do you lose spontaneity, but you lose spontaneity in large part because you lose zeal. You lose zeal on the part of people who are looking to the professionals to accomplish, or looking to the paid people to accomplish things. And when you lose that zeal, you also lose something which is valuable, which is authenticity. If you are not doing something because you're zealous for it, you are doing something for some other reason. And what's the main reason in here? Alan talks a lot about materialism, right? Focused on resources, which you could say are necessary, but they're only necessary if the thing that you're building is material. And like, obviously you need to eat and to live and all that stuff, but like, we're talking about loads and loads of resources that go into missions. And I could tell you, that's one thing I've jotted down here, which I probably won't get into, but I could tell you about the amount of resources it took to keep our family on the field, and we used less resources than a lot of people. It really is like mind blowing. The amount of resources that go into putting people on the field and keeping them there. And there are benefits to having the institution. It streamlines a lot of processes. It makes things easier. It provides support. Like, there are lots of good things, but we require a lot of resources to do missions the way that we do it. And today, in some ways, we probably use more resources than missionaries of the past, but we've also recognized this type of thing and have tried to, lead with more giving natives leadership and building native support of the country you're in. So it's similar but different today, but it still takes a ton of resources. But anyway, the thing is, like, if you're not doing things out of zeal, if you're not doing work out of zeal, you're doing it for some other reason, which is a lot of times material. And when you do that, you lose maybe the most invaluable thing you could have for anything, whether you're talking about business, whether you're talking about religion, just some side project, some side passion, like whatever your passion is. If you lose zeal, you lose authenticity, because people know that you're doing this thing for other reasons. And when they see that you're doing things for other reasons, or even if the suspicion is there, even if you're not, then all of a sudden the truth value of the claims that you make of this thing that you're trying to propagate, like, that's questionable. Are you doing this for the money, for the material? Or are you doing this because the thing that you're saying is true? Is the idea that you're presenting, is that the thing that's driving you forward, or is it the money? Because that makes a big difference. You're trying to get people to adopt some ideology, and if that ideology is not self-motivating, if the motivation doesn't spring forth from the ideology, why would somebody else want to accept it? Well, they would want to accept it if it can get them money, right? If your motivation is money, and now all of a sudden, or material, and now people are like, okay, hey, you know what? I would like money too. Hey, if I adopt this thing, I can get close to the missionaries who have the compounds, who have the resources, who have, yeah. And whether that's purposeful or not in your own mind, your motivations start to get clouded as converts. And Alan goes into some examples of this, but examples abound around the world of people who have been compromised, converts of other countries who've been compromised because they've been allured by the material. And it's just not a great system to work out. And through this, Alan, of course, he talks about a bunch of different concepts that he's talked about before. And one of the main ones there is that we do this because we desire control, right? There's a fantastic paragraph. It was one of the best I've read in Alan's work so far. If you go to the link and you just search this first sentence, you can go read the quote, but I'll summarize it. So here's the first sentence. Spontaneous activity is indeed rather alarming to those who direct an organization such as ours. And then Alan goes on to say, he's like, hey, look, we have these really strict structures because we're scared of charlatans, or we're scared of people who espouse ideas that make us uncomfortable. And of course, heresy makes the church uncomfortable, but we have started to nitpick the things that make us uncomfortable to the nth degree, hence so many denominations, right? It's not any longer about the gospel and the Nicene Creed or Apostles' Creed. It's women in leadership, and it's universalism versus annihilationism versus eternal conscious torment. Like, all these things divide people because we're scared of lack of conformity to a ridiculous degree. And so Alan's like, yeah, okay, these organizations, these structures, they protect against charlatans, but you know what they also do? They protect against zeal, right? Or not protect against, but they quell zeal. They prevent people from zeal, from taking individual initiative, right? Well, why is that the case? Because organizations and structures, especially the more strict they become, the more control that they gain and seek, they don't like things on the edges. And that's either edge. The edge towards, zeal. It's kind of that U-shaped curve there. Zeal, charlatans have zeal, and they're trying to get people to think differently. But like evangelists and people who are on fire for their belief, for true belief, they have zeal as well. Institutions can't have that, right? We can't have these people who are independent of our structure. And Alan's like, that is just totally antithetical to what the church is supposed to be. So we have all of these complex systems and structures in place that we have to maintain, that we have to feed this beast in order to maintain control, rather than the simplicity of individual passion and zeal, trusting God with results, not trying to seek all these material ends, which means we don't have to focus on material means nearly as much. And our system is so complicated. And as it almost always does, comes back to a desire for control and power. And we justify those means by claiming we're seeking the ends of God. And I think a lot of times we really are trying to seek the ends. But I'm working on an episode right now for the next season, where it's kind of the same thing that we talk about a lot. Like, it matters the order that things come in terms of motivation. Do good results. If I can get certain results that look good, does that justify the means? It's like, no. Like, trying to seek power, trying to domineer others in order, like great example, Christian nationalism, right? Let's say that people's hearts are genuine and they really want other people to follow God and obey his laws. Is legislating that and domineering them and voting for people like President Trump and a lot of the cronies and just other people who are I can't even, Jeffries, I think, who is like, the Sermon on the Mount, we don't need that for politics because, we can't have people walking all over us. Like, those types of people, is really voting for those types of people and trying to get this domineering power over others, like maybe you'll be able to pass this legislation that you want, but your means are totally undermining the ends that you say that you want. So the ends don't justify the means. Like you have to get your means right first. The means are the ends in the process of becoming. You can't get good ends if you don't employ good means. You might get immediate results. You might get things that look okay on the surface, but they're going to, kind of like Alan's talking about, all right, we might accomplish something initially, but we're creating these facades, these structures, these houses on sand that are going to just be demolished. And he's like, look at the Muslims, what they're doing. It's like they don't have these crazy structures of trying to go get people, all these institutions and things. And he's like, they just go out with zeal and look at what they're doing. Like they're drawing people in because they truly believe in the power of what they believe in. And their authenticity and their spontaneous zeal are drawing people to themselves. And we see that this is the case. Of course, you have examples of in some countries where Islam is doing terrible things, just like you did back, I'm sure you do today, but also back in the 70s. Oh, what was his name? Well, there are lots of dictators that claim to be Christians, but they're Rios Montt. That's who it is. Rios Montt, he's staunch Christian supposedly, and he's like murdering thousands, tens of thousands of people in his country, right, for power. So you have examples of this kind of thing everywhere throughout all ages, the Crusades, whatever else. But that's not how true faith spreads, and what makes faith and ideology lasting. It's gonna be the zeal and the lack of all this structure that needs to be fed. So in all of this, there are ideas of consequentialism, institutionalization, like the episodes from the propaganda season where you sacrifice on your means to accomplish certain ends, the history of the church, all kinds of things, and then Bernard Eller, Kierkegaard, all of these things are coming to mind, and I feel like this chapter it just hits on so many ideas. And then on top of all that, thinking about my anecdotally, my missionary experience and some of the things that I saw that were good, but also some things that I saw that made me really uneasy, and or things that I've realized at this point. I'm like, I look back and I'm like, I don't like that. So much kind of came up there, and I can't elaborate on all of it, but hopefully what I did discuss maybe sparks some ideas in you, and you'll go back through this chapter and give it some more thought. Reach out if you have any questions or want to chat about it. So thanks for tuning in. We've got 2 more chapters, and we'll be back next week.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.